You're listening to the FM Talk Show, brought to you by CER Facility and Property Management. Keep abreast of the latest industry news and conversations with facility management leaders and practitioners. The FM Talk Show, advancing and promoting the FM industry and profession. Here is your host, Craig Henry.
Welcome to the FM Talk Show. We're talking facility management, all for the advancement of the facility management industry and profession. We'll be covering our 3 slots, that is some news and commentary. We'll then be going over to our discussion with our guest. And the topic of discussion is business ethics. And we'll close off with a continuation of our journey circumnavigating South Africa, which I did towards the end of last year. So we chose the discussion today to be around the subject of business ethics. And this was triggered by the current proceedings at the state capture inquiry. And we are all familiar with the disclosures made by BOSASA, or African Global Operations, regards their fraudulent or generally corrupt manner of conducting business in order to secure state contracts, and of course, maintaining those contracts. So our discussion with our guests, which is Mr. Lionel Adendorf. He is the MD of 100flowers, whose business is integrity and reputation management consultancy. Now, just as a forerunner to this discussion, I wanted to share an experience that goes back some 10 years, but is still very relevant in terms of the discussion that we are about to engage. In 2007, I was the lead consultant appointed then by ABSA to form a detailed due diligence on the ABSA portfolio. And that was at the time, if you may recall, when Barclays had recently taken up shareholding in ABSA. And the brief was essentially to understand the facility management cost, i.e. ABSA has an extensive built environment portfolio. What is the cost of owning or leasing that portfolio, of using it, of providing facility services and facility management? And the outcome of that process was then further to advise ABSA at that time of the facility management strategy to yield efficiency and effectiveness improvements. And of course, one cannot go into the detail or the merits of that assignment. But one of the aspects that we investigated, and specifically given ABSA's nature of business, which is in the financial industry, we wanted to find out the research at that time of how the workplace would influence the propensity for employees to get into unethical or corrupt practices. We then commissioned a specialist in this field, and that was at that time Dr. Janet Minnaar van Veyeren, and we asked her for an expert opinion on the impact of the physical work environment on the ethical behavior of employees. So that commission came from ourselves as the consultant, and hence able to share some of those research insights. And the research really referenced industry research in turn, and hence any of these statistics that I would share with you is readily accessible from a research environment. So one of the things that we wanted to understand is indeed what is the extent of fraud, corruption, unethical practices in the workplace. And the doctor referenced several research, and the first going back to 1999. So yes, that is quite a few years back, but I certainly believe that the results is still very much relevant and applicable. But in 1999, a fraud survey conducted by KPMG Southern Africa, found that 75% of frauds were perpetrated by the company's own employees. In 48% of these cases, i.e. half of that 75%, there was collusion between the internal fraudster and a third party. Then in 2002, the same fraud survey, the figure had increased to 88% of employees being the major source of fraud. Further, in 2005, KPMG conducted, again, a similar exercise where they assessed 162 public and private sector organizations, and 76% of the respondents indicated that employees were the source of fraud. And areas in which the majority of losses occurred were bid rigging, and of course very applicable to the whole scenario around Bosasa, because it went around bids, contracts, etc. Secondly, the misuse of company assets. Thirdly, the theft of inventory and equipment, corporate espionage, theft of intellectual property, and theft of money. So at 55% of those losses, collusion between employees and third parties remained the largest cause of fraud. And this was followed by internal controls, poor internal controls, that is, 48%, and 32% were management over the overriding of internal controls. Also, 2004-2005 survey by KPMG showed that 91% of fraud committed by employees were repeat crimes. It was found that in 1 of 6 cases of fraud in a company, other employees were aware of what was happening, and a surprising 17% of the crime had been suspected for some time before the crime was reported. Also, some research by PricewaterhouseCoopers also showed that companies lose 6% of their turnover as a result of crime. And this was based on a 2002 report to the nation on occupational fraud and abuse. Another interesting statistic is that of every 100 adults, approximately 25 will lie, steal, or deceive if they have the opportunity to do so, whereas 25 persons will not steal or lie even when faced with a temptation or opportunity to do so. So this leaves the middle group of 50 people who are not particularly honest or dishonest. So they could go either way. So research has shown that this middle group will become dishonest if the culture in the workplace is unethical and nothing is done about crime. The same middle group will, however, stay honest if the company lives by values of honesty and integrity, and if consistent disciplinary action is taken when crime occurs. So the insight from this research really sort of supported already established research that the workplace environment absolutely impacts the engagement of employees, the productivity of employees, and facility management is about creating the right workplace, the right experience, the right environment for people to excel. So one can then certainly take that application further to say that the workplace environment, the way that we design, the way that we create that experience can also go a long way in terms of reducing the likelihood of unethical behavior, dishonesty, corruption. Of course, it has to be said that facility management can do so much, and of course, the organizational leadership and management obviously plays absolutely a crucial role. So I hope that sort of contextual information has sort of set the scene for our discussion with Lionel. And yes, we look forward to the discussion with him in the next moment.
You're listening to the FM Talk Show, brought to you by CER Facility and Property Management. CER Facility and Property Management is capable to meet the diverse needs of any organization where the built environment is a core enabler of the organization's strategy and operational performance. CER Facility and Property Management is part of the greater CER ecosystem of people-centered enterprises, focusing on high-performance facilities and physical assets, and range from advisory to operational services, and over the life cycle of the built environment, from portfolio strategy, design, construction, occupational readiness, operations, and repurposing. CER Facility and Property Management, built environments for human flourishing.
You're listening to a brandlive.co.za podcast.
Right, we're about to have our discussion with Lionel, and as I introduced him earlier, he's a specialist in ethical business, reputation management. And Lionel, what has sort of triggered this discussion? It goes back a few weeks with reference to the state capture inquiry, and specifically African Global Operations, previously known as BOSASA. And really facility management was sort of probably for the first time in history get the press, and all for the wrong reasons. And that being because BOSASA had entered into unethical practices both in the securing and maintaining their line of business. And our experience, and certainly our company, is that when you do business with public sector, it is extremely structured, administrative, bureaucratic, tons of documentation to be completed. And of course, we are always told that this procedure and the adjudication and ultimately the decision processes is always to assure fairness, transparency, and not having any unethical or corrupt interventions. So despite public sector's almost infamous for being bureaucratic in this regard, there are so many incidents of fraudulent and corrupt practices. And the question that comes to mind is, why are these procedures, policies not working? How is it possible that you could still have companies like BOSASA securing work through bribery, corruption, allegedly, but as reported, in the state capture inquiry? Just your opinion on that, please.
Greg, thank you so much for inviting me to talk to you and your listeners about this very, very important matter.
Yes.
But I think the answer is not that easily defined. I think we need to locate ethics and integrity within our social structures. We need to take it into our domestic structures, and then we need to take it into society before we get even to the corporate structures. And it is for me a matter of how often have we been stopped by a traffic officer for speeding, and he then asks for money for a cool drink, and we don't want to pay the 200 Rand fine, the 2,000 Rand fine, and we think that it's okay if I can get away with paying the 20 Rand. That is a problem, because the conduct that we expose in a corporate setup, it is not a conduct that we suddenly inhibit when I enter the offices of my workplace. It is a conduct that I came with because I am conditioned by society in a particular behavioral pattern. And that is what is wrong. It is wives, and I always joke with my wife about she going to the shop, and suddenly or 2 weeks later you find that there's a new outfit in the cupboard, and she will tell you, no, I bought this thing last year already, and she knows that is not the truth. But it starts with small things that we then become the norm, and we can carry it forward in our lives. So now we get to the corporate setup, where it is, where we have, at one of our clients' offices, the kitchen fridge, for instance. And then suddenly you realize that I don't have yogurt for my muesli this morning. Oh, can I take Anne's muesli and not tell her? She wouldn't even notice that I used some of her muesli. You know, and then you are confronted later because now Anne is running out of muesli. And then we get this issue of the popularity of these the whistleblower lines. There's not a single corporate company listed on the JSE that does not have a whistleblower line, for instance. The popularity of the public protector that has become, her popularity just shot through the roof over the last 5 years with Tuli Madonsela, where everyone has suddenly become more observant about what is not right. And let's not talk about ethics and integrity for a moment. We've just observed that this guy asking me for what am I getting, this is not the kind of conversation that I think I should have with a service provider. The issue that my boss asked me to facilitate a bursary for his daughter with a service provider, that is just not right. And that is where we need to arrange things, because as I said, it is domestic behavior that became societal behavior that we now take into our workplaces, and that is where we need to stop it. But also what needs to be said in this, in an important discussion like this, is that over the last few years, we have seen government putting emphasis on rooting out unethical behavior and correcting certain mistakes. And some would criticize the appointment of commissions, but I think the commissions have helped government and have helped society into understanding what is wrong, into understanding how do I act better. We take, for instance, Life Esidimeni. We take, for instance, the Zondo Commission. We take the Nugent Commission into what's happening at SARS. We take, for instance, the issue of not only the public protector, but we now even have different ombudsmen and the Section 9 or Chapter 9 institutions that are all there to help us define what is right. And therefore, when these things are highlighted, we need to ask, is it a problem, or is it just the nature of our society starting to speak out against what is wrong?
And Lionel, you mentioned a very a point that, like your illustration around the fridge, you know, taking a little bit here, taking a little bit there, because you know often the individuals which sort of becomes highlighted as guilty of certain corrupt practices. You know, I recall, you know, feeling, you know, quite proud of certain individuals, and they just looked like model systems, model citizens, model professionals. And I've been wondering, you know, how does something go wrong with such an individual? But as you mentioned, it's perhaps not a once-off event. It is perhaps a sequence of little things that perhaps escalated. Would that be a correct sort of interpretation, how things could have developed to a point where it's now in the open?
We, the good, must make it not get away with it. We, the good, we are enabled to the corrupt and to the bad the moment when we see something and we keep quiet. And as I have said, it is not a sudden thing that someone is suddenly becoming corrupt. You know, it is simply the bad, the good not speaking up, or being good is then not overwhelmingly enough to the bad. And that is what we need to prevent. And that is why we need to start with our children at home, you know. That's why, and I have found something very interesting in my work and in my research on this matter, is the relationship between integrity, sustainability, and responsibility. Because we need to move beyond just living a good life to a point where we live a responsible life. And I want to get back to my family system, that I do not have a fight anymore with my son when we say, the moment you get home, take off your uniform. And, you know, he will ask, but why? Let me just watch this show in my school uniform. Let me just... And you say to him, but look, it needs to be washed. You know, be responsible, because the is sitting with it, then the chances are that it will not be washed in time. Be more responsible. Don't play in your school uniform because it will get torn. Don't play in your school uniform because this will happen to it. So it is about being responsible and taking responsibility. Let me then address the issue of sustainability. The moment when we do not speak up against corruption, as we have seen in many examples in our current life and in corporate life in South Africa, and I'm not going to mention examples. We know who are being mentioned at some of these commissions, but let's use Bosasa because you referred to it earlier. It's the moment when the good do not speak up against the wrong. Then you threaten the sustainability of this country through compromising a company. Because if a company closes down because of corruption, like the SASA is facing now, it would mean that people will be without a job. It would mean that a company that has contributed to the fiscus, to our economy, is now being withdrawn from the fiscus, is now being withdrawn from the economy, and therefore will cease to exist. And that is the important matter that we need to understand, why we need to speak up, why we need to live better lives, why we need to live good lives, and why we need to be vigilant against any practice of unethical behavior.
And Lionel, in terms of, when this matter, and again, we're talking about POSASA because, they are a facility management company and we are part of the facility management industry. I certainly approach SAFMA and ARTS, being the industry body, the South African Facilities Management Association, and sort of pose the question, how do we as an industry respond to this situation that certainly tarnishes the entire industry? Is there any sort of suggestion that you could provide in terms of how we as the industry should be speaking out, or any thoughts or guidance there for us?
I think the companies like yourself should realize, as I mentioned, the importance of living responsibly.
Yes.
Being responsible towards your environment, being responsible towards the economy, being responsible towards the communities that you work with. And once you make them understand the importance of being responsible, you are halfway through it. The second thing is you must make your service providers, your stakeholders, your clients, your boards, your chairpersons of the board, your CEOs understand the value of living responsible lives. Because if you get a single person that threatens your livelihood, that threatens your sustainability, that person needs to be isolated and he needs to be thrown out, because he threatens not only the sustainability of your company, but also the livelihoods of those who depend on the company. I think thirdly, we also need to understand what is it that companies like yours and your peers, what is it that they do to instill greater sense of responsibility among their workers? Because some of these things, Craig, and unfortunately I need to concede that it is organizational cultures, corporate cultures, that make this happen, that make it possible. And that is where we need to bring the stop. And to say, just yesterday, I was talking to someone who is about to interview a salesperson or a sales director. And I looked at his questions and I'm asking him, but where's the question about ethics? Where's the question about morality, about integrity? And it's like, why should I be asking those questions? And I explained to him the importance of integrity and sustainability and responsibility. And suddenly he started realizing, okay, I must ask this question. Because I asked him, what will you do if he's your best salesman and he is found to have been paid bribes at the end of the day? What will you do? And he said, I fire him. And I said, yes, but remember, it's not only you firing him. It's other companies who would not be doing business with you anymore. Good companies won't want to be associated with bad companies. And the good must stand up so that they can overwhelm the bad and not the other way around.
Lionel, thank you very much just for sharing those insights and wisdom. And I think what you've sort of brought across, sometimes we can get so confused in making things so complex, but yet it is so simple. And as you mentioned, it is something that starts from our childhood days and what is inculcated in us, and the principle of simply doing what is right when no one is certainly looking. And I always felt in my own mind that for me it's as simple as to ask the question, am what I'm thinking, what I'm about to decide, what I'm about to act, is this in the interests of my organization and its employees? And for me, that is the crux of it. But I thank you very much for giving us this few minutes of your time, and greatly appreciate it. Thank you, Lionel.
My greatest pleasure, and thank you so much for using your show to promote ethical conduct within the workplace and within corporate. And I really, really appreciate it, and it was nice talking to you and your listeners.
Thank you very much, Lionel. Go well. Bye-bye.
Podcasting, the practice of using the internet to make digital recordings of broadcasts available for downloading to a computer or mobile device. Or, as they say in South Africa, a fantastic way to tell a good story or to bring your brand to life. To find out more on how podcasting can change your brand, speak to us at brandlive.co.za. brandlive.co.za. We bring your brand to life.
Right, we are now continuing with the final slot, and just spending a minute or two just to talk you through the next phase of our trip. If you can recall, 2 weeks ago I spoke about traveling from Uppington northwards to the Huxtian Pan, and that was a 650 kilometer detour. Half of that on gravel road and the other half coming back on asphalt road. Again, absolutely beautiful landscape, and the Huxtian Pan in particular being hopefully the location for the next land speed record. From Uppington, continued along the northern border with Namibia, and heading towards the west coast. Arrived at Port Nolloth, and then did a short trip. I think it was about 60 kilometers to Alexander Bay, and that's the northernmost town, sort of just on the border of Namibia. And Alexander Bay, and in fact certainly that stretch of coastline, known for diamond mining, both on sea and land. And so the landscape, as beautiful as it is, it's also very protected. So you simply can't leave the road and sort of walk onto the beachfront. But that's the nature of that specific area. And again, being on the west coast, again a different type of landscape. Next to the ocean, on the other side, you sort of have a semi-desert environment. Watching the boats going out both for fishing and for diamond dredging. I also came across, which I found quite peculiar, what looked like a diamond digging operation, and it seemed sort of like a very informal operation. And I was then informed that no, these are actually formal diamond miners where they're actually digging, to find diamonds, and I assume that it's within a formal selling and buying arrangement. Yeah, so following overnighting in Port Nolloth, basically continued down the west coast, and we'll basically continue with the journey in 2 weeks' time. Thank you very much for connecting with us, the FM Talk Show, and look forward to having this chat in 2 weeks' time again. Thank you.
Guess who got brands talking? brandlive.co.za.